All right, and welcome back, everyone, to another week, a very exciting week we got going on here in Washington. But welcome back to the Oath Podcast, where we hope to empower our military and veterans community through education and advocacy. So, Jesse, welcome back again to the show.
Thank you.
I know you've had a pretty exciting but rough week with this coronavirus thing going around, and all of us, I think, are taking a hit by it. But I'd just like to say that you're in the thoughts and prayers of us here, and whatever we could do to support you, just let us know.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. All small businesses, I think, in Washington are really taking a hit right now, and especially those that are forced to close like we were. I had to lay off all my employees, so it's definitely a rough time for everybody.
Absolutely. We got a lot of guys out there out of work. My buddy, he's in construction. His team was laid off of work, so I mean, it's getting rough. I mean, even our guest today was actually affected. Was on the way to the courthouse, got called and said, "Hey, they're not actually doing hearings.
Everything's being turned off."
So everything's being turned off. As I said, though, I'm at least happy I was able to get my Chick-fil-A, so I was happy about that. So there is a positive side.
You got to have priorities.
Yeah, man. As long as, hey, everybody else got their toilet paper, I got my Chick-fil-A, I'm happy. So.
And they probably gave you napkins, so if you don't have toilet paper, you're
I'm saying. So in the military, we can just roll with it, right?
There you go.
But yeah, with that being said, really, I just want to say to everyone, I hope that this really finds you well and in good spirits. Definitely take the necessary precautions, and I don't want to say don't get too hyped up with the media hype about everything, but at the same time, definitely take care of you and your family. And there's even been some cases out on JBLM. I heard that there was another one just at Bremerton not too long ago.
Yeah, there was an officer up at Bangor.
Yeah. So, and then now they're actually sending, I think the U.S. Navy ship Mercy, I think, is en route here too. I just heard.
I know the governor requested. I hadn't heard the.
Yeah. So on the way here, it looked like they had made the announcement that the ship was actually en route here. I don't know what the detail is going to be on that, but
it's normally moored in Baltimore, so it's a long trip around.
It is a long trip, but you know what? We just hope that all of our men and women that are currently serving, that are in the process of responding to this, we just keep you in our thoughts and prayers. If there's anything that we can do to support you, shoot us over an email at info@oathpodcast.com so we can help get out the message. Whether it's just a basic, hey, stay inside, wash your hands, whatever the case may be, we want to help spread the word how to take care of yourself and your family. So, but again, Jesse, thanks for being here. And above all, thanks to our wonderful producer and the team here at BD Local, because
Absolutely.
We're still here, and she is a brave person. So we really thank the team here at BD Local for just allowing us to be here. And so with that being said, we have a very exciting guest today, Mr. David Oliver, who's a practicing attorney here in Tacoma, Washington. He's been practicing Social Security disability law since 1992, if I'm not mistaken. And he's taught Social Security law at Harvard University, which that's kind of a big deal.
That's a big deal.
I mean, Harvard's just some random law school. So, and then on top of that, he's been a member as well for the National Organization on Social Security Disability and SSI benefits. And then he also handles the Department of Veteran Affairs, the appeals hearings. Yeah. And then he also takes that above and beyond and goes to the actual board itself and represents veterans at boards. So a very exciting guest today. We're very excited to have him and looking forward to it. And I know this touches home for me because I've been in a lengthy appeals process. I don't know how it touches for you, but it's certainly a very important aspect of law that gets overlooked.
Well, I think for every veteran, this is something that you need to be aware of. I think a lot of guys leave stuff on the table when they leave the service and not think that it's either something they're not entitled to, or they don't want to go through the process, or just don't understand it. And I think it's important to get that information out there so people can go and get what's owed to them.
Absolutely. And one of the things is with all the negativity that's spreading out there, there's a lot of, well, you're not entitled to this. Or better yet, it's been X amount of years, you're no longer entitled to this. But individuals like Mr. Oliver, is going to educate us a little bit,
Absolutely.
even on Gulf War syndrome, on, new rules and regulations that apply to that. So really having individuals like him out there in community is huge, and it's a benefit. So we're really grateful to have him, and he's here in the studio with us today. So again, taking
Absolutely.
the risk, but we're really grateful to have him. So with that being said, We're going to jump into a quick break real quick, and we'll have, when you guys come back, we're going to have Mr. Oliver on the show with us, and we'll say hello and check in on our favorite thing, and that is the Veterans Appeals process.
All right, we'll be right back.
All right. All right, everyone, welcome back again. Here with Jesse of Urban Float University Place, and now with our guest here, Mr. David Oliver out of Tacoma, Washington. So, Mr. Oliver, thank you so much for joining us and taking your time out of your busy schedule, and we're really grateful to have you here today.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, no worries. So first and foremost, why don't you give us a little bit, I kind of gave you a little brief rundown, but why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are, your practice areas, and kind of, where veterans kind of fit into this area.
Absolutely. So my practice is in fact specialized in disability and specifically VA and Social Security disability cases, and there's a fair amount of overlap between those two areas, and a lot of people can be applying for both, kind of depending on the situation. But I handle cases for veterans that are still working as well, so would not be applying for Social Security disability. But I've been, as you indicated in your intro, I've been doing this for more than 20 years now, and been doing the VA portion of it for a little over 5 years now. And as you indicated, I'm a member of the National Organization of Social Security Claimants Representatives, but I'm also a member of NOVA, the attorney and representative organization for veterans.
Oh, okay.
Nice.
That's great.
What got you into the Veterans Affairs field and moved you over from Social Security?
I began to see more and more people since my office is here in Tacoma, and we are located so close to these various bases, and a lot of my clients were in fact veterans. And we began to chat and talk about their issues, and I became very interested. There's a lot of similarity between what we were already doing, but there were nuances that were interesting to me, and it was a population that I really wanted to help.
Nice. And that speaks volumes to itself. I mean, there's a lot of people that talk a lot of big game, right? But then when it comes time to step up to the plate to actually help veterans and members of our military community, they just don't, right? So really to have someone that does have that passion to where they go out above and beyond to help us is really night and day. And so, but I guess one of the biggest questions that you probably get is, when is it necessary to get an attorney involved in my VA process?
Right.
And why should I hire a VA attorney, or why should I hire you to represent me when, you have service officers out there that say they can represent me for free?
Yeah, it's a good question. Well, first of all, you probably will have difficulty getting an attorney to represent you until you've gotten at least one decision. Generally speaking, attorneys cannot get involved and request a fee until there has been a decision by the VA. So at least for your initial application, you're going to do it either on your own or with the assistance of one of the VSOs. And to the question of why should you not just continue with the VSO throughout, if you feel like you're getting good representation, there is no reason. You can certainly do that. These are good organizations, and they have a lot of good people, but it's a big organization, and the abilities of various people vary. And you may or may not feel like the people you're dealing with have the full range of knowledge that perhaps you feel your particular case requires. And if you're getting denied, you might want to seek a different approach.
Absolutely. So when we talk about VSOs, for those individuals that aren't familiar with kind of the nuances of the terminology, we're talking about veteran service organizations. We're talking about American Legion, Disabled American Veterans, even the Department of Veteran Affairs have service officers.
Yep. Veterans Foreign Wars.
Right. So really these are classified as, veteran service organizations. And so for now on, VSO is fine, but,
Right.
So that's the thing too, is also, you specialize in law, right? So
Correct.
This is something that, compared to a veteran service officer, while they may know the inner workings and how the claim process goes, but there's also that, they're not trained in law and to sit in front of an administrative law judge, right? Because that's what it is, administrative law, right?
That's what you'll be in front of an administrative law judge when you get to the Board of Veterans Appeals.
Right.
Or if you get to the Court of Veterans Appeals.
Right.
Yeah.
So when it gets to that point, you want someone that's got at least somewhat some law training, and
That's correct.
to be able to help you out with that. So, that's great.
And so, if I'm a veteran and I use my VSO to submit my claim, and say some of my things get denied. At what point do I make that decision to appeal that decision? Should every decision be appealed, or is there kind of a line there where you say this makes sense or it doesn't make sense to appeal?
Well, I would say every decision that you think is wrong should be appealed. And there's some people that think that, well, I'm not very impaired in a particular area. So even if it should be service connected, it just doesn't bother me that much. One thing that people need to remember is even if you get service connected for something at a 0% rating, that gives you priority when you're getting medical treatment at the veterans hospitals and the clinic. So it's still worth getting that rating in there. And you never know, later down the road, it's possible things can get worse. So you'd like to go ahead and get things noted as being service connected as soon as you possibly can.
So even a 0 rating is better than a denial.
Correct.
Well, see, it's what a lot of people don't understand is 0% is a rating. You're just
Yes.
not getting compensated for that rating.
Right.
So people oftentimes they'll see 0% and they're like, and so I can understand the confusion there. But at the same time, people need to understand this is in fact a rating and you're being treated for it.
Well, and I think the important thing there is if you're a veteran and you've had a 0 rating in the past, and now that condition has gotten worse over time, that 0 rating allows you to go back to the VA and request help for that.
And at least you don't have to fight over the issue of should it be service connected or not. That's already been decided.
Exactly.
At that point, all you're discussing is how severely are you impacted by that condition.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times there's confusion there that people think, okay, 0 means, okay, I can't get anything later.
Absolutely.
And it's not, and that's not the case. So.
I think another misconception, which you can probably clarify, is there's a lot of people out there that think if they have a rating of 100%, or if they have a rating of permanent total, like I am, that they have to stop working, right? Or if you get above 50% or X amount, right, that you have to stop working. When the reality is you don't have to stop working.
Yeah, I mean, if you've got unemployability, then presumably you're not working and not able to work. But you can be at 100% and still be able to work if it is based on just an accumulation of a series of percentages.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, do you find in your practice that you're specializing more in those individuals that actually are looking for what's called TDIU, the total disability, individual unemployability, or do you find yourself working with a wide variety of clients looking for 50%, 100%, or whatever it is?
Well, it's a wide variety, and of course, because I came into this having already been practicing in the area of Social Security, some of the initial people were, in fact, they were so severely impaired that they were not able to work anymore. So we were definitely approaching it from the point of view of unemployability for those individuals, and it's an important thing to seek out. Let's say the person is not at 100%. But they truly are unemployable. If you've got the percentages that allow you to seek 100%, that gets your pay rate boosted up to the 100%, even if the individual things that you've been rated for wouldn't get you to 100%. And the difference between 90 and 100% is the biggest jump in pay of all the different
It's like $12,000.
Yeah.
Well, per month it's a little over $1,000 per month. Yeah. So you're talking about per year, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a huge thing. And I think Jesse actually had a question earlier that I think was really outstanding because let's be real. What's logical, even within the law in general, what's logical to us is, law is not logical, and neither is the VA when it comes to how they rate people, right? So Jesse has a great question for you. I think would be a great.
Yeah, I was hoping you could kind of explain the VA rating system to folks. I know for myself, when I went to retirement and I went and studied it, it's not a 1 + 1 = 2 system. Like if you have something that's 50%, something's 50%, you're not 100%.
Correct.
And so I think a lot of people there's a lot of misunderstanding there. And if you could kind of go through that and explain how they make that calculation.
Yeah. So there's math and then there's VA math, right?
It's like accounting math.
So what happens is there's a table that they utilize, and if you have a certain percentage, let's say, and I would have to be looking at this to give you the exactly correct step ups, but let's say you have 30% and you get another thing that you're rated at 10% more. In some situations, that 10% doesn't actually increase your overall rating at all.
Yeah.
And sometimes you got to get a certain amount more before it notches it up again. Okay. Yeah. And so you really have to look at the chart to see when the next bump up occurs for the additional thing that you've been rated for the additional increase in percentage that you got on that additional rating for the overall thing to increase.
Yeah, and so my understanding was, you kind of start out, the VA starts with a 100% person. So say the first thing
Right.
you're rated for is a 50%.
Right.
So now you're down to 50% of that person. And say the next thing is 25%. Well, it's not added on top, it's 25% of the remaining 50%.
Right. Yeah. And so it's just a graduated thing, but it's more complicated than just adding each additional percentage to whatever you already had, and say it's not going to be
Yeah.
straightforward math on that. No.
Yeah.
No, it's
Now, let's say I apply for, I don't know, let's say I apply for tinnitus as a big one, right? So in theory, 10%, right?
Right.
I apply for tinnitus and they come back and they deny me. When I hire you, am I able to say, well, you know what, I also want to apply for this, this, and this, or a TDIU, or whatever the case may be? Or do we have to actually stick to what the VA has come back and denied you for?
Well, you do not have to stick to, you can always apply for new things. Now, again, if it's a new application for a new condition, the attorney might say, apply for that. And then if you either get denied service connection or you don't get the rating you thought you were due, then the attorney will be more able to get involved
Right.
and help you at that point. Because again, if it's a new claim, then the attorney's not going to be able to get involved to the extent that he wants to charge a fee for it, for the service. Okay. Which, by the way, it's just so people know, it's a percentage of what you are seeking. Most attorneys will limit themselves to 20% because that's the amount that the VA won't question, actually, as a percentage of what they achieve for the particular claimant. But you can, let's say you actually had applied for a whole series of conditions. And let's say you had PTSD and you had sleep apnea and you had tinnitus and back pain. Okay. Let's say you got some of those ratings that when they came back with a decision you agreed with. Actually, you don't really disagree with it at all. And then some of them you disagreed with. You don't have to appeal all of it. You can appeal different ones. And in fact, there is, to complicate matters further, a lot of the older veterans who have had cases in the past know the old system of appeal. There was the AMA, which is the Appeal Modernization Act, which went into effect on February the 19th of last year, 2019. And they changed the way appeals are done after that date. Before that, if you got a decision by the VA, then there was one thing you did. You filed a notice of disagreement, and then the regional office went back and reconsidered it and issued another decision. And then if you disagree with that, then you might appeal to the Board of Veterans' Appeals. Now you can do multiple possible things. You can appeal and say, I've got new evidence that I want to appeal, and you can file what's called a supplemental claim because you think you've got new information you want them to have and to consider. Or you might say, no, you've got everything there is to have, you just decided it wrong, okay? And I think a more experienced person would come to a different conclusion. And in that case, you can ask for a higher level review where you're saying, yes, everything that you need is already there. I just want a higher level person with more experience to look at this again, and I think you'll reach a different conclusion if you do. And then the other option is you can in fact appeal directly to the BVA. Let's say you just feel like that's where you need to go. And then the notice of disagreement now is an appeal to the BVA, although under the old rules, a notice of disagreement just meant you were asking for your case to be reviewed again by the regional office.
Now, for our listeners, please explain what the BVA is.
Yeah, okay, so the BVA is the Board of Veterans' Appeals, and so that's an appellate body that is going to review everything from a more legal standpoint than was perhaps happening in the original decision.
Okay.
So I have a question. Like, so if you do an appeal, do they go back and re-review stuff that has already been approved, or just the stuff you're appealing?
They will they will not go back and review stuff that's already been approved.
Okay.
Only what you've appealed.
So you can't lose anything.
Right.
By going through the appeal
Right.
process,
They're-
you can
they're-
only gain.
Yeah, they're not going to go after you for things that, you're not running the risk of losing stuff by appealing to things you think were decided inaccurately.
That's a huge fear with a lot of people. They're
Yeah.
afraid if they got 50% and they're applying for more, they're going to come back and actually take away things that they already have.
Yeah. No,
Right.
I think that's a huge fear.
Now, be aware though, there are cases where the VA is always allowed to go back and decide whether or not certain kinds of conditions are improving, and they might make changes to their earlier decisions. But it shouldn't be because you appealed
Right.
that occurs.
Right.
Yeah.
But that's why it's so important, kind of, in the midst of while you're appealing, and even when you're not appealing, right? That's why it's so important that you actually pursue very vigorously treatment, right? Because if you're claiming PTSD, but you're not showing up to psychiatry appointments, you're not showing up to psychology appointments, you're not doing what you
Right.
need to do, the VA is going to look at that, and you can't get angry when the VA says, well, obviously there's nothing wrong with you, or you know what, we feel that you've improved.
Yeah.
I mean, what would you say about that?
No, that's very true. And I've encountered a fair number of claimants who they go and they have their C&P exam, which is the exam that the VA schedules to determine what your condition is, what your impairments are, and and ultimately what your rating should be. And let's say they get what they wanted on a particular issue, and they say, okay, I'm good, and then they stop getting treatment. Well, if it comes up again later, then they don't have any new information showing what their ongoing limitations and symptoms have been, and it does create a problem.
Right.
So you should stay in treatment for the things you think limit you. On top of it, if you become so impaired that you can no longer work, Social Security is even more focused on what is your day in and day out treatment showing as to what your limitations are. So if you're not in regular treatment, it's really hard to show what they need to see. And so for Social Security, they do not offset for the VA. It's one of the few things that don't offset your ability to get Social Security. So if you're going to have the option of getting both, you really want to maintain the treatment that will allow you to try and do that.
Right, right. So with that being said, here's a question we don't have written down here. But let's talk about those pesky words, permanent and total.
Right.
Let's talk about that for a second.
Okay.
Because I think permanent and total, the rational human being says, oh, well, it's for the rest of my life, right? But is that not the case with the VA, where permanent and total doesn't necessarily mean permanent and total?
I would say it means that unless and until there's some obvious change that shows that it's better.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it does make it a little bit more difficult for them in the process, right? To go back and say, okay, you know what?
Right.
Da-da-da-da-da.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think they're going to chase you down unless something comes up that brings it to their attention.
Right,
Yeah,
right,
yeah,
right.
yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
perfect. Yeah. So, another great question, and this was actually submitted when I made the announcement that you were coming on the show, is does hiring an attorney to represent me, whether it be during the appeals process or actually going to a board hearing, does it give me a greater advantage? Do I get do I have a higher chance of getting a favorable outcome versus doing it myself, or just hiring or having a VSO represent me?
Right. So, as I indicated earlier, you are probably not going to have an attorney at the initial level, and so we're presuming that you've already either been denied service connection by the time you get to an attorney, or they haven't granted you the percentage you think is correct
Right.
for you. So clearly there's a problem. There's a disconnect between what you think is true and what the VA has agreed is the level of impairment that you have, or whether it's service connected. So, and if you had, some representation previously, it means they have not yet been able to convince the VA. So, having a new set of eyes from someone who is a trained attorney, who can go and look at the rules and the regulations, who can then go and look at your medical treatment and evidence and try and hopefully find those things that the VA, for whatever reason, has not been able to see and understand that you thought were obvious, and bring it to their attention and increase your chances of ultimately winning. So that's the goal, and that is, I guess, the reason why you're seeking an attorney to help you with that, is someone to pull those things together.
Right, right. Yeah. So do you have to is it still the same guidelines in the sense where you represent people from Washington State, or can you represent people because it's a federal thing?
Right.
Do you have the ability to represent people from all necks of the woods?
From anywhere in the U.S.
Right, and that's because it's a federal court, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Right. Yeah, you don't have to be a member of the bar of any particular state or jurisdiction. And in fact, when you go to the Board of Veterans Appeals, when I have my client here, I'll tell you in a minute about the person that I had this morning, actually. But the normally, if you ask for a hearing, most people don't ask for an in-person hearing, in which case you'd have to go to Washington. Most people will ask for a video hearing, and that administrative law judge may be anywhere, and I think they are mostly back in Washington, but they may appear from anywhere, and so your locale is really insignificant in this particular area, and all the rules are the same all
Right.
across the U.S. So it's not really based on any kind of state law.
Right. So the reason why I bring that up is because it's really important to hire someone that you can trust, and with first of all, really positive reviews out there, which you do have, by the way.
Thank you.
And then, you want to hire someone that you're going to feel comfortable with, and that you think is going to represent you vigorously. And, unfortunately, like with most careers, not everyone is going to really do that. And so
correct.
it's really important that you spend time talking to, whether it's the legal staff, whether it's talking to Mr. Oliver, get a feel for, hey, look, is this the best person for me? And you're not limited to just by people that are there in the state. You can talk to, someone in Florida or whoever.
That's true. That's true. Although I would say probably a lot of people would feel more comfortable if it was somebody that they could go and see
Of course.
and sit down with.
Right.
But yes, you theoretically could talk to anyone across the country.
Right. Okay.
Oh, I did want to mention, actually, because we are living in unusual times, as you kind of were alluding to
Right.
at the very beginning of this, and it's affecting the VA just like everybody else. And I had a BVA hearing scheduled for this morning in Seattle. My client, all the way up until yesterday, I had my paralegals, sitting by the phone, kind of half expecting that we might get a call from the BVA saying, we've gotten the word come down that we're not supposed to do these anymore, but we didn't. So we assumed that we were still on. And my client was driving toward the hearing office when we got a call, actually not from the BVA, but from the DAV, saying they had gotten an email out that the BVA had shut down. And that all hearings, all video hearings had been canceled as of today. Today was the first day where these things got canceled. So my poor client, who's been waiting for months and months and months, happened to be on the first day that it gets shut down. But this just kind of shows how this is a moving target. We don't exactly know what it's going to happen. My understanding is that for people out there who may have BVA hearings either scheduled or they're expecting to be upcoming, that there's going to be an option to do hearings online. And this is something that's on the BVA website now, that for those people that got their video hearings canceled, that they're going to be able to request a online kind of a hearing. Although it's not very clear, because what they're referring you to in that notice, that they're saying, you lost your video hearing, and now you can apply to do this online hearing. Well, what they refer you to is a form that actually is normally filed when you first requested the hearing. So it's unclear from their own information right now how you request it, given that you presumably already requested a video hearing.
Right.
So even I'm not quite sure yet. I'm going to have to be in contact with them for example, this client that I had this morning. How do you want me to request this now that we had previously requested a video hearing, and we don't know when, if, maybe months down the road, we won't be able to have video hearings. Yeah.
That really just goes to show, though, even when an executive action is taken, even the VA scrambles from time to time. We throw a lot of flack at the VA, right? We sit here, we talk about, well, the VA's not doing this, they're not doing this, they don't know what's going on. Da, da, da. What we don't see is the executive decisions that are being trickled down, right? And so to your point, I would really encourage folks to really just be kind and patient with the VA right now and understand there's a lot of things happen.
Oh,
For
sure.
a,
And-
for a
and-
while, they were even opening up hospital to civilians.
Right, and I don't want it to. I'm not really harshing on the BVA here. I'm sure that they were moving. It was a moving target for them. They were probably getting orders coming down from on high. Where how at the beginning of all this we were being told we could go into crowds of 250 people, and then they said 50, and then they said 10. And I think that everybody is dealing with a moving target here.
Right.
So I'm fully understanding of the fact that these may have been last minute decisions, and everybody's trying to think on their feet.
Now, David, you said something interesting when you were explaining with your client there that he'd waited quite a while for this hearing.
Right.
Can you kind of explain or talk to the timeline? So when I submit my appeal, how long am I looking before I get in front of the BVA?
Well, it's a good question, actually. And the hearing that I had scheduled for this morning was on a case that predated the AMA, the Appeal Modernization Act. And I think he's been waiting for close to a year. And I think that was not at all unusual. Now, they're claiming that with these new rules, timelines are going to get shorter. And I think they really are shorter for some of the cases where we're filing appeals with new evidence, and I think you're getting some decisions within a few months on those. And I haven't yet had a higher level review, but my understanding is those are taking similar lengths of time. The BVA, it's still longer, but hopefully not as long as some of the cases from the old system.
So are you saying 3 months, 6 months? I know that's always been a complaint of the VA. They take forever to get adjudicate these claims. And,
Right.
And you hear stories of guys waiting years to hear stuff. What's the typical timeline you guys?
Right. So again, under the new rules, I think it's going to be probably for the BVA. It's hopefully going to be less than a year.
Okay.
And I would say I'm seeing some decisions coming down in the 3 to 4 month range for some of those appeals where you're submitting new evidence. And although I haven't had one yet myself, I have heard that it's a similar approximate
There's a
3 to 4
unicorn
month
out there.
timeline for the higher level reviews.
Yeah. Now,
Yeah.
call me a little legalistic here,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe I've watched too much Law and Order. I don't know. But faster isn't necessarily better, though. I mean, if you think
Well, right.
about the time that it takes to really gather evidence to support your claim.
Correct.
I mean, some of us have been out for a number of years.
Right.
Which some of us were smart and kept our records pretty meticulously,
Mm-hmm.
right? The majority of us weren't, right? But I guess where I'm going at is I guess faster isn't necessarily better, because in a court of law, particularly in the criminal defense system, you
Mm-hmm.
ask for a quick case, so that way on their side they don't have time to gather evidence against you, right?
Well, and to my point there, it was when you apply, like when are you be able to get in front of the judge? Not, you have all your evidence, you're ready to go, and then you're waiting.
I see, okay.
Not faster as in, it's just when I apply, how long
Right.
out are they scheduling?
Well, one thing that has sort of changed that whole analysis under the new rules for the new appeal rules that went into effect again February of last year, you can have a claim continue almost indefinitely now. Okay, so under the old rules, you would file your claim, you would get a decision, you would file an appeal, you would get a supplemental decision, you would go to the BVA, they would issue a decision, and then you would go to the CAVC if you were going to go that far, and you'd be done. If you didn't get what you wanted, that was it. That's no longer the case. You can, if you've got new and material evidence that develops, let's say after you've already gone to the BVA now, some fellow service member calls you up and says, that thing that you were telling me that happened, that was the reason for your service connection for your PTSD, that you just couldn't come up with any evidence showing that happened. It turns out that I know that our fellow service guy wrote, their mom about it contemporaneously with the thing, and it's very well described, and we now have this. All right, and this is after the last BVA appeal got a decision. Well, if it's within a year, you can file another appeal saying I've got new and I keep wanting to say new and material. That's not it's not it's new and relevant evidence is the
Right.
term they're looking for now. You can actually go back again, and you can do that also after a CAVC decision if you've got new evidence.
So, like, does
Yeah, if you do it within a year.
now in some cases, like say with Gulf War syndrome, and new evidence comes out, does the VA automatically go back and look at those claims that they've denied in the past and say, well, now we have this new evidence, and maybe do they automatically go back, or do you have to go and say, hey, I was denied, and now reapply?
Well, there's a couple of different ways to look at that. One is if it's one of the presumptive conditions, okay, the Gulf War syndrome, which is a number of different things, including things like fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue syndrome, and there's a number of others. But the VA has actually made a decision to extend out the time you have to apply for that to December 31 of next year, I believe it is, 2021. So originally that would have cut off, I believe, back in 2016. That's now been extended out that you can still come with under the presumptive category if you file it or if the symptoms arise on or before December 31, 2021. So yeah.
Okay. So, real quick, I want to pick up on something that you said. You talked about a letter, right? Joe Blow writes his mom a letter, and he talks about whatever symptoms or what's going on with him, right?
Right.
What does the VA actually count as sufficient evidence, particularly during the appeals process? Can I
Right.
take that letter I wrote to my mom that, for whatever reason, she decided to keep?
Yep.
And use that, right? Or statements from battle buddies. That's a big one, right?
You
So
absolutely can.
Joe Blow, he was in combat with me. He knows me before. He knows me after. So what counts as sufficient evidence in the appeals process?
Well, what counts as sufficient evidence is a harder, but what counts as evidence that you can use, all of that counts as evidence. Okay, so you particularly if it's contemporaneous, that's wonderful. It means that somebody was thinking about it at the time that things were going on, and those are wonderful if you can get them. If you were writing letters, if there was a picture that was taken of something that was relevant, if there was video, if there were recordings, those are wonderful because that gives potentially evidence of something that you're saying happened. But if all you got is you saying it years later, that's more difficult.
Right.
But there's a lot of different things that are considered, and the question is whether or not it establishes. And of course, you have to remember that they're supposed to be giving the veteran to a certain extent the benefit of the doubt. But you got to have something. You got to have more than just that statement years later. And so you want to look back at all kinds of evidence. You want to go, maybe get your DD-214 and things that are stated there about reasons for discharge. You may want to go get active duty orders, police reports about certain things, newspaper articles, contemporaneous letters that we just talked about, unit records and logs can be useful, flight records and manifests, photographs, tape recordings, etc. Anyway, there's no real limit to things that other than your imagination as far as it has to be something relevant to the point you're trying to prove.
Now, I don't know if this is more rumor or hearsay, but there used to be this saying, I don't know if it's still around, that the VA actually kind of frowned a little bit on like your regular primary care physician writing a letter of support, because the VA at one point in time supposedly was viewing this as, well, he wants to keep you as a happy customer, so he's going to write this letter for your support, right? So what about outside VA doctors or outside DoD doctors? How much of a factor do they play in these decisions?
Well, they certainly have to take their opinions into account. Now, what may happen is you end up with a CNP exam, the exam that the VA scheduled you for, where a doctor says one thing, and then you have an opinion from a doctor outside the VA that says something different. If you've got conflicting evidence, then the VA has to decide which one is the better supported. And it's sometimes those CNP exams, in my opinion, some of them they don't have a lot of detail about certain things.
Right.
And so if you've got a doctor that can do a better job of detailing what your symptoms are, what the tests show, and why they show what you needed to show in order to show a certain level of impairment, then that ought to be taken into
Right.
consideration. So it really just depends on the quality of the evidence. Yeah.
So, how does a doctor who spends 30 minutes with me,
Right.
right, maybe an hour,
Mm-hmm.
depending on the CMP exam, right? How does that doctor really come to a decision about things that affect me
Yeah.
day to day on a lifelong, and I don't mean this question in a combative way.
Mm-hmm.
I just kind of want to try to get inside of the VA's mind, which a lot of people do, but I mean, like,
Right.
how does that outweigh what my primary care doctor may say?
Shouldn't. I mean, definitely the person with more knowledge of you and who has seen you and your problems over time is your doctor. But again, a lot is going to have to do with how well, on both sides, it was documented. So if the CNP doctor wrote it up very clearly and said the person's level of impairment is this, and here are the reasons, and they're very well set out and very clearly, and there's nothing in the medical record that conflicts with that, you're going to have difficulty. If what is in the CNP exam is kind of bare bones, doesn't really give good reasons for why certain decisions were reached, and then your treating doctor or examining doctor that was outside of that CNP exam gives a very detailed report that references the medical evidence and shows why what was determined by that CNP exam was wrong, then that ought to be what controls.
Right, right.
Yeah.
So, maybe I decide to go through this appeal process. When I come and talk to you for the first time, what do I need to bring to you? And do you turn away cases and say, look, you just don't have enough material here, or you don't really have enough evidence to go through the appeal process?
Right.
What is important when I come see you that first time to bring with you? What evidence and what helps you make that decision whether I have a case and you're going to take it on or not?
Yeah, well, those are two different questions. Okay, the first one is what should you bring, and then the second is
True.
would I turn away the case from an initial standpoint, just from the first meeting? And the answer to the second question is sometimes, and I'll tell you why in more detail in a second. But in terms of what you should bring as much as you can. As much as you've got. You were mentioning earlier that some people are really good at having maintained their records. Okay, and they've got everything from treatment notes from when they were in the military, their exit, their DD-214, and all their medical records that they've had at the VA and other places since then. And they have all that, and it's organized, and it's chronological, and that's an attorney's dream. It makes our job so much easier to figure out what's going on, what did the VA decide, and to try to figure out what did they do wrong that this veteran is coming to see me because they think that the VA has done something wrong, and we can the more of the data we've got, the clearer a response we can give to the veteran about whether we think that there's a good argument for any one or more of the different conditions that they say they would like to appeal. I may not be able to say in a first meeting whether I think the person's got a good case or not. It may really depend on medical evidence that comes in, and in some cases, medical evidence that still needs to be developed, whether or not it's going to be a good case. So I may take a case where I'm telling the veteran, it really kind of depends on what your doctors say, because nobody's really bothered to ask them X, Y, and Z to connect the dots. And that sometimes is something that can still be done. Sometimes they come to me and say, this is what was found. They said that I was 20% disabled from my back or my hip, and I say, well, then how much could you bend this way or that way? And we go and look at the rules and what they require as far as what you need to have a higher rating, and it turns out that what the VA said was pretty much correct. And so we may decide that those particular ones don't really need appeal. So I will try to figure out the ones that really don't need any further development and really only deal with the ones where it makes sense to say that either definitely the VA was wrong, it's just clear, or maybe the VA was wrong, and we don't really know because nobody's actually connected all the dots medically to see how bad it really is. Yeah.
I think that's a key point too, because what's great about the answer is you do have a lot of. First of all, I want to break down how you work.
Right.
It costs a veteran nothing to come in and talk to you.
That's correct.
And then even if you accept the case and you work the case, they pay nothing until the decision, and they actually get paid from the VA, right? So you
That's
work
right.
on a contingency.
Correct.
So that doesn't necessarily mean, folks, that you're going to pay 20% up front of the expected earnings. It means that you're going to get 20% or whatever Mr. Oliver charges for that. So that's really important. And then what's great too is he's not just going to take a case to get your money.
He's got to take a case he thinks
He's going to take a
he's
case
gonna win.
that he's going to
Correct.
be able to win, or at least he thinks he's going to win.
Right, or at
And-
least that I think that there's a reasonable chance that if it's developed and the evidence turns out a certain way, that there's a possibility. I want to give the veteran the chance to have a winning case if it looks like there's a possibility. They don't have to have it nailed down when they first come and see me if there's a way that we can get from point A to point B.
Right. Now, is it a set fee, whether it's 20%, 15, whatever?
No,
Is it a
yes.
set fee, or do you charge extra for your paralegal work or time or anything like that?
No, the attorney's fee is a contingency fee. I don't get anything unless we win, and it's 20% of the additional back pay that they receive, and it's not 20% of everything they ever get. It is 20% of the increase over what they had already been getting before.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
In your experience, do you find that the VA is pretty close in its decisions, or have you found some incompetence as far as when they're giving these ratings out there?
I think the VA really tries to reach correct decisions. I do. I don't. When they don't reach correct decisions, it can be due to the fact that the medical evidence just really hasn't been as developed as it needed to be. Sometimes they just make a mistake. Sometimes a CNP doctor reached an abrupt decision after, as you said, a very short meeting where they just kind of missed the boat, just didn't really understand what was going on, and particularly if they were discussing medical conditions that the veteran was a little nervous to talk about, and they only felt they had so much time to deal with it, and they just stopped after a while.
Yeah.
So I don't think the VA is ever like out to get the veteran. Okay. I think they are trying to do their best to reach a good decision with the tools they have.
Yeah.
Sometimes those tools are inadequate. And sometimes they just haven't had time to play out.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, you know what, we've seen some major shifts in the VA recently, right? For example, the VA is hiring more veterans, so there's more veterans on staff now than there's ever been. That we're seeing open ideas to alternative medicine, even ideas like flotation and stuff like that, right? So we're seeing new open. So I think the VA is really doing a great job of getting
Right.
these new thoughts process in, right? And they definitely don't want to see a repeat of what happened in Vietnam.
Right.
We don't want another Agent Orange issue where veterans are having to wait 20 or 30 years. And it's too late. So I think the VA is making some definite changes, but we also have to understand that the VA, I mean, in essence, we're totally unprepared for a war, 20-year war. I mean, this is a long war.
Yeah.
People are seeing more combat time than they've ever seen before, and we hear that rumor where it's like, oh well, you think of World War II and those guys and what they had to go through, but you know what? It's certainly traumatic what World War II and Vietnam veterans went through, but you know what? Today we can literally see the whites of people's eyes before we drop a bomb. I mean, we can literally see the destruction right there in front of us. So, we're not minimizing the things of the past generations, but we also need to understand what we're seeing and experiencing today is quite detrimental as well. And the VA is doing the best that they can. They're not perfect. They're large organizations. They make
Right.
mistakes.
Well, and I think that the part of that too is it's also incumbent upon the veteran to be proactive.
Right.
In preparing, the VA allows you to submit your claim before you even leave the service now, and
Right.
have that as soon as you leave, then they start going through it, and you can have a response pretty quickly.
they treat
And if things
people.
change, apply for the increase that should apply to that change. For example, I recently talked to a guy, no names, but who had sleep apnea, and he was service connected. They gave him his service connection for it. He was not on CPAP at the time that he was initially given the award. Several years passed, and it got worse, and he was put on CPAP. That normally should have bumped him from 30 to 50%. He didn't apply for the change.
Yeah.
For years, when he finally did apply for it, they granted it to him, but he'd been on CPAP for 5 or 6 years in between, and I kept trying to find a way to push it back, but the problem was the VA was correct at the time they granted him the 30, and he just had not applied for that increase, and they granted it back to when he applied for it. But
Yeah.
it's just unfortunate. So when you see that you're getting worse, and it's worse to an extent that you think that ought to result in an increase in your rating, apply for it.
Yeah. Be proactive.
Because normally they
Keep your
can't pay you
documentation.
earlier than the date you applied.
Oh, wow. So
Yeah.
they won't, typically they don't backdate it to when you were first, or when the change was noted medically.
They normally can't go earlier than the application date. Yeah,
Wow.
right. For payment purposes.
Yeah.
That's a lot of money.
It can be.
It can be. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Right,
Well,
right,
I think one of the greatest things too is honestly it comes down to being proactive in your treatment, and then always, these veteran service organizations are so crucial and critical, right? Because typically, your veterans of foreign wars, their service officers, all these guys, they're going to be up to date, right? Because VA regulations are no different than the laws that we live with on a day-to-day basis. I mean, things change every day. One moment it might be illegal to walk your dog on the side of the road. The next it might be completely legal. Same concept with the VA, correct? We're always seeing an evolution of what is and isn't allowed, what changes, what doesn't change.
Right.
So you want to pay attention to that.
Well, and I think the key thing, like David was alluding to, is if your condition changes over time, that can change your rating. Don't think I got the 30 then and that's it. If it gets worse, whether it's a hip injury or back injury, your tinnitus gets worse, whatever, or maybe you got a 0, now it may move you up into that 10, 20, 30% range.
Oh, I did want to add one
be
other thing
proactive.
on that, by the way, which is if they did it wrong long ago, that doesn't mean because you didn't appeal it within a year of that time necessarily that you're stuck. There is a kind of a claim called clear and unmistakable error. Let's say that in fact my guy that had sleep apnea in fact had been on a CPAP, and they just ignored that fact and kept him at 30%. But he didn't do anything about it for years, and he comes and talks to me and says, they never did it. Well, but you got a decision that's now 10 years old. Can you do anything about it? Yes. Because a Q claim is a claim for clear and unmistakable error. You can now go into them and say, that decision back there, that was just wrong. Anybody, there is no question about it that it's wrong. And if they agree, then that person can get paid actually all the way back.
Wow.
That's outstanding. Yeah.
But that has to really be a clear case.
Yeah.
To do that.
And that's really some great information to have. And so, well, we're just about out of time here. Time really goes by fast when you're involved in some great topics. But real quick, if you wouldn't mind, I know it's displayed down there at the bottom, but give us your website, your phone number, and then if there was really just something that you can talk to the veterans community about, one just real gripping thing that you wanted to communicate, what would it be?
Okay. So, well, first of all, my website is SS Lawyer, S like Sam, Lawyer, LAWYER.org. The phone number is 253-472-4357. And I guess the one thing that, if I could leave in the minds of everybody, and that is stay in treatment. What the attorney really needs to be able to work from to help you is to have good medical data that shows what you're really dealing with, and open up and talk about it and detail what are your functional limitations, no matter whether your doctor really wants to hear it or not. Keep saying it because it needs to get detailed in those records exactly what you're dealing with.
Right. Outstanding. Well, Mr. Oliver, we really thank you for taking the time out of your schedule, especially in the middle of this health crisis, for coming and being a part of the show today. Just know anytime you want to be on the show, you're always welcome. So thank you for that. We really appreciate it. And normally we would close out the show here, which we're going to do, but so you'll have to put up with Jesse and I talking just a little bit here because we actually have a really cool guest coming up. I think Jesse's really excited about this one. So,
yeah.
again, right up the alley of what we do here in advocacy. So Jesse, tell us about the upcoming guest and when they're going to be on the show.
Yeah, so we got Kyle Kuchera coming up from the Veteran Transition Mission, and what they do is they get any veteran who's gone out, they hook them up with an IT school, and they get them certified in like cybersecurity, IT security. You don't have to have a college education or anything. They pay for everything. They work with the schools. They have certain schools they work with. They pay for your travel. They pay for your food. They pay for your lodging. And I think it's a 9-day or 9-week course. And you come out with a certification in cybersecurity, and then they help you with find jobs, and it's a really, really great thing. And Kyle started this after he got out of the service, and it's really, I'm excited because I think it's a huge thing to really, because a lot of guys get out, don't know what they want to do, or they think, oh, I'm infantry, so all I can do is go be a policeman or something like that. And it really just opens up a whole gamut, and it's available to anybody.
Right.
It doesn't matter what you did in the service.
Right.
Yeah.
And I tell you, I had the opportunity to speak with Kyle, and really a phenomenal program. And what was really gripping about it was, as I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, well, I have a little bit of GI Bill left. Why don't I do this? So like, it's really intriguing. Doesn't matter what your MOS is and or was. It's just continuing education is really, really important. Even in a legal standpoint, you're always having to kind of continue education. And IT in today's society is huge, right? So,
Well, and even if you don't have any GI Bill left, they can still work with you.
right.
So great project he's got going on there.
Right. And the company is based out of South Carolina.
South Carolina,
Yeah.
but there's schools in Florida. There's one here in Bellevue, in Washington. I think there's one in Arizona. So they have different schools they work with all over the place.
So because he's based out of South Carolina, we will not be doing the Facebook Live thing. He will, however, be on a Zoom session. So next show, we're not going to be live, but there will be a show, and we'll have that up in a couple of days 5 days or so post-production. It'll be up on our website, www.oathpodcast.com. And then we'll also have it up. We're going to start bettering our social media platform as well. Jesse and I are talking about how to improve that. So be paying attention. We got some great changes on the way, and we got some great guests coming up, because after that we have there's a gentleman from USA Jobs as well.
Yeah, Rudy Marielli works for the Department of the Navy, and so he's going to come and talk about USA Jobs and the federal application process and how that works for veterans and getting federal jobs.
Yeah, and get some great tips there and really learn about that process. So, but again, Mr. Oliver, thank you so much for joining us. It's really a pleasure. We've got to do the elbow bump today. Everyone, please be safe. And remember, always here at The Oath, you are cared for, you're loved. Be here tomorrow, and I encourage each and every one of you, if you need help, reach out. Don't be afraid. Go get help. Call that Veterans Crisis Line number. And if you have to, you could email myself and Jesse here at The Oath, info@oathpodcast.com. I'm regularly checking emails, and we're here for you as well. So, guys, thank you so much. We look forward to seeing you next show.
And don't forget, if you have any topics you want us to go find people to talk about, please submit them there at that email address. Or if you just have questions in general about any previous guests, then we can reach back out to those guests and get those answered for you.
Absolutely. And as always, if you're interested in sponsoring the show, because we definitely need the sponsors to stay on the air, continue doing what we're doing, we'd love to hear from you as well. We could talk about how to make that happen as well. So, guys, again, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you on our next show.
Yeah, thanks again.